Hello everyone, hope everyone's having a good day today. Today is act number 11. It's going to be acts of Clatter Discord, so it's music today. And we're going with But That Ain't Real Country, the Florida Georgia Line Greatest Hits review. So, thinking out today, I'm going to probably ramble and extrapolate because I like to do that. So, talk a little bit about the history of the band, a little bit about the album, and then kind of one of the big arguments that they brought up, which we'll go into about the history of the band, and how it affects the final review. And then we'll tie it up with a bow and a nice little review. So, according to Wiki and my phone, they started in 2010 as a duo. In 2012, they had their big song Cruise, which broke major sales records. It was downloaded over 7 million times, making the first country song to receive the Diamond certification, and became the best-selling digital country song with 24 weeks at #1. It's really hard, if you think about it, to remember a world before them. They've really changed and broke everything with their sound. And with their sort of like taking Kenny Chesney and then just amping it a little bit further to sort of party music. Initially, everyone kind of loved it. They got into it. They did about 4 albums. They've now broken up. They released the greatest hits on there, so they're in hiatus at this point in time, and both of them are touring separately. But they did literally change the sound of music. They created a whole thing that acquired its own level of haters and created this whole subgenre where there's lots of artists making it, called bro country. So they're actually a really important band, especially in the 2010s. That's why they have this, which I'll show you here. I love the library. That's how I find my things. I think I need to film something. I go to the library, dig around, see if I found something interesting, and something about this piqued my interest. So, greatest hits, it has 18 tracks on it. I was surprised listening to it just how many of the tracks I heard. And I forgot how ubiquitous they were. Like, they were literally everywhere, and just hit after hit after hit after hit. Cruise, Meant to Be, Holy, May We All, Get Your Shine On, Dirt. Even some of the later ones in the last albums, I remember hearing. Up Down, which is I think off like their 3rd album that they did, possibly the 4th one. It's everywhere. And I just kind of was amazed at how quickly music can be non-existent and suddenly it's just everywhere to the point that people are driven crazy by it. I think it'll be interesting, and the greatest hits things will probably show this. In about 5 to 10 years, as the people who says they hate this stuff is going to start coming back and going, wait a minute, this was kind of cool, and this was kind of cool. And suddenly when they're partying or they're going to their favorite bars or wherever it is, they start playing these songs and realizing they're not as bad as they thought they were. As to the big part that I think I really wanted to talk most about, I thought was interesting, and even highlighted saying in the part saying, but that ain't real country, is I'm old enough that I've taken a few more spins around the world, and I've seen a couple evolutions of music, especially in country, and I think country's probably the worst this way. There's this huge sense of, but this is real country. I now see people who look back in the 90s stuff, so you're talking like early Toby Keith, Garth Brooks, Alan Jackson. Oh, Alan Jackson's not a good example in this case. But Garth Brooks is probably the best. And then you throw in sort of the queen that came into the 90s, which is Shania Twain. And what's funny is the same people of that era who listened to 80s country bitched about the new country in the 90s and said, this ain't real country. And the people in the 70s, going back even further, there's this thing called outlaw country, which is Hank Williams Jr., Merle Haggard, Hank Williams Jr., Merle Haggard. You had a renaissance with Johnny Cash in there. And they brought in this funky sound. And it was this really deep, bluesy, funky sound. And it didn't sound like other country. Another person who really got hit big through the outlaw country was Willie Nelson. And it didn't sound like the polished stuff from Nashville. And everyone was like, but that ain't country. And then eventually it became country. And then in the 80s it polished up. And suddenly you had artists like Kenny Rogers, who were very pop, and you had Anne Murray and Crystal Gales, and these people who, Dolly Parton, who started cleaning up their sound, and their stuff was literally written by pop stars. Islands in the Stream, which is, let's get my names right here, which is Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, was written by one of the Bee Gees. And the whole culture was so tired of disco, and disco is dead, and the writers are bad, and all the artists suck. So they just went underground, and they wrote hits other places. And it ran its course. And then you go into where I said earlier, Garth Brooks came through and excited a tired environment there too. And then Toby Keith, who was wallowing around in that in the 90s, kind of getting lost, he gets signed by DreamWorks, and he blows his stuff up in the early 2000s. So there's always this, but this ain't real country happening. And then a number of years later, either something that's more not real country comes in, or another thing that we hear, or we just, our ears adjust to it, and it just becomes part of that jukebox that everyone listens to. And all the country stations then play, or becomes an era of that country. Honestly, ever since about the mid-90s, in my opinion, it's sounding more and more like 80s rock. So to me, some of this new stuff really doesn't feel like country. It feels a lot more like pop. But this is where I reflect a little bit and realize, what do modern country people look like? They're not, as much as we want to picture the banjos and the tractors and all of the shtick, which is fun sometimes too, don't get me wrong. All of that stuff, have you ever been out in the country? People don't live like that anymore. People don't have tractors. They don't have, I mean, there's some hunting and fishing, but when you listen to Luke Bryan, or you listen to Florida Georgia Line, these are the guys that went to college, came back home, they still like to hunt and fish and have a good time, country style, but they're more civilized, for lack of a good phrase, or more urbanized might be more accurate, than the generation before. And that's why the stuff going into this, it worked really well. Because these are people who, it's in their blood, it's in their dirt. A lot of their songs, they go to the lyrics, they talk about it like one's God, your mom, and me. So it's still in the DNA, but it fits the generation that's currently talking about this stuff. And I think it's just real easy as someone gets older to say, well, that's not my genre. This stuff's just crap. As a slight tangent, just to make the point, I play older stuff that I thought was cool in rap and hip hop to one of my nephews, and he just stares at me with blank eyes and goes, what is this? And why are you listening to it? And he'll move on and put in whatever he's playing and talk about how the beats are fire. I do find it interesting with Florida Georgia Line, just as a side note, and I'll come back to the review for this. I find it interesting, Florida Georgia Line, because they were one of the bands that really tapped into something that did really break the industry. And me being the guy who likes rabbit holes, I love them immediately because they did stuff that you weren't supposed to do. And that was Big and Rich. And honestly, they have one really big hit, and then they have a whole bunch of influence. They have the one song that if you've gone to any place that's a little bit redneck or just kind of outside county fairs, called Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy. When this song came out, it was either universally reviled as being the stupidest song people heard or the most fun song you've had at a party. And then what happened is all the people that were in Florida Georgia Line and Brothers Osborne and those kind of things of that era, they heard this stuff and they said, wait a minute, we could do that? And the production studio, or the studios that made the albums, the companies, they're like, well, we don't want to deal with those people because that's another story for another time. As brilliant as Rich from Big and Rich is, it's another conversation. He's not always the easiest person to deal with. So you can hire two little upstarts, get a good plum deal, play off the sound, and make something that can be marketed a lot cleaner and prettier. Yeah, it didn't work here. So I scanned back to see, for those who were following on episode 5, which actually opened up the whole conversation, I kind of said the best song is a box. I don't. They kind of all are in a case like this. I don't know their catalog well enough, but I was impressed by the quality of the music. I mean, there's definitely a repetition of the sound. You can tell it's party music, and they're not really wandering far from the reservation in any of their stuff. But if you listen to it, there is a certain quality. They know what they're making. I guess the sort of an overview of it. I would call it a solid. There we go. Solid. It's a solid greatest hits collection. Again, I said it earlier, one of the things I was kind of surprised by is I didn't realize they had 4 albums. I thought they had maybe one more. And I really thought they would have been out more than 10 years. As a digression and maybe a walk in another time, it does make me, as much as I appreciate bands like this that stick around for 10 years, it makes me really reappreciate stuff that was in my wheelhouse growing up, which was Brooks and Dunn, because they did this thing for like 20 years, and their run on hits is huge. Or someone like Alabama, which is essentially the same band from the early 80s. So 10 years is amazing, but it makes the other bands that stick that much better. I guess as a general review, I give it an 8 out of 10. It's bro country. You're either going to like it or you're not. If you listen to the whole thing, I think there's probably enough on it that you would like it. But at the end of the day, I have a feeling a lot of the people who like this stuff, at least now, you have all the albums already. A little bit later, if people want to buy full productions with the stuff on it, which I think is actually dying art, there's probably value for it then. But give it time to breathe, it'll be worth a lot more. But to wrap up in a bow, as I started saying, real country. Is bro country or Florida Georgia line real country? It is. It may not be the kind of country you like. Maybe you're more of, you want the down home roots, you want the roadhouse, that kind of stuff. But it is valid, legitimate, quality country music. And you don't even have to like country to like it, which is why they got so popular. They were able to make a sound that still kept some of the guitar twangs and some of the dirt and the roots and the cowboy hats, but still made it accessible to everyone else. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any additional thoughts or ideas, please put them down in the comments. If you like what you saw, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet and you watch a couple and think I'm kind of interesting, hit the subscribe. That'd be awesome. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. And thank you. Bye.